By the way, because of our 8-hour time difference, it is 10:40 a.m. here in California, and
And
I
she's
do have
already
a
hitting the booze.
I do have a spit cup here because I was like, we're tasting 3 wines, and I still have a full day ahead of me after this call. But Tony, it's like almost 6 o'clock in the evening there. You're ramping up
Yes,
for dinner in the
we are
evening,
indeed.
so you don't
Almost
need to
7 o'clock.
spit.
Almost 7
If
o'clock.
you
No spitting. Spitters are quitters.
There it is. There it is. So sometimes a class or an educational program that you go through is life-changing for obvious reasons, the education and the knowledge that you take away. But sometimes experiences like that are life-changing because of who you meet. And I met Tony Smith on our first day as wine students together at the Culinary Institute of America back in 2012. And Tony, who was originally from the UK, had flown to California to be part of this month-long certification class because he and his partner had just purchased a winery, a property in the Douro region in Portugal, a very historic property that dates back to the late 1500s. And he wanted to, as a new wine producer, just get a baseline knowledge on everything around wine. And we became fast friends and have kept in touch since. And Tony is fascinating because, yes, he's from the UK, but he's really lived all over the world. He was a journalist. That was his career for many, many years before entering into the wine world as a wine lover, which is what led him to pursue the business. He had been living most recently before that in Brazil, and obviously now resides in Portugal. And my family and I were lucky enough to visit the Covela property that you'll hear him speak about in 2016. And everything that he shares in today's episode is so true, just about the beauty and the uniqueness of the property, the terracing of the vineyards, the lushness of the organic nature of how they farm. And I can't wait for you to hear about some of the things that they're doing. That includes recently receiving the organic certification, which is very hard to do. And then on top of that, if that wasn't as impressive enough, they have also been awarded the regenerative viticulture certification, which really speaks to how your property is farmed and your practices and how it relates to global warming. And it's a very new thing that they've already locked down. And I'm so proud and excited for my friend and his partner and the beautiful wines like the Avesso grape that are coming off of their property. So in today's Sip Spotlight, you'll hear Tony and I tasting 3 different bottlings of Avesso, which is a very rare and sort of off the radar grape from a very specific area in Portugal. And I'm excited to highlight that for you. And it's also available through his website, which I'll put in the show notes, and you can have it shipped to all states in the US and some other countries as well for some of our international listeners. So check out the link in the show notes, not only to purchase this beautiful Covela wines, but also if you're traveling to Portugal, you owe yourself a visit. They have residences that you can actually rent and stay on the property, overlooking the Douro River on one side and vineyards on the other. And it's just like nothing else I've ever experienced. So here we go with the impressive, thoughtful, fascinating, interesting, exciting, and funny Tony Smith from Portugal. Tony, we're finally here. How long have we been trying to do this?
Oh, about 13 years. Yeah, we did meet in the beginning of 2012. So a long time, 12 years and a bit.
January of 2012, we walked into the Culinary Institute of America in St. Helena in the Napa Valley and became fast friends, a small circle of us. And we learned so much, didn't we?
Yeah, we were all a little bit wet behind the ears. And then suddenly we became sort of wet on the palate. We gave it all, right?
I remember as we were going around the room and meeting each other, and we all spent, I don't know, 8 weeks together, whatever it was, and hearing your introduction And I was like, this dude just bought a winery in Portugal? Like, wow. I'm coming from the corporate world of Disney and I just want to learn about wine. And this dude just bought a winery. So let's start there. What
Let's start there.
led up to that moment? And maybe on that first day of class at the Culinary Institute, what were you thinking?
Well, I have to say I was a little apprehensive because I didn't know who was going to be on this course, right? And I thought, oh, this is going to be like maybe all super sommeliers or winemakers or whatever. And I went in as a wine producer, but with really the idea of learning the basics. Because, I'm not trained as an enologist. I'm not trained as a viticulturist. I'm not going to say I had no idea, but, why did I get into the wine business? Because I like drinking. What can I say?
You and me both.
No, I've always had this, this thing for wine. I mean, I'm originally from the northwest of UK, which is really not wine country. It's definitely beer country. But my previous career, before I got into the winemaking stuff, was I used to be a journalist. I was posted to several countries, and all of them were, without exception, either big wine producers or big wine drinkers. And especially in Southern Europe, we really consider wine to be food. So when we say food and wine, it's a little bit of a misnomer because wine is already food. I mean, it's just part of your table. So it's very difficult for us to separate the two things. We see it as, I suppose in postmodern speak, it would be like the holistic approach to the table, right? It's all part of the same thing. So on that day when we first met, I was a little apprehensive because I thought we were all going to be like real, 5-star somms and, So to go back to your question, what was I thinking? I mean, it was like a little bit intimidating. I felt a little bit guilty saying, oh, we just bought a winery. It sounded like, you remember those adverts from the 1970s with Victor Kiam, Remington?
No, because I'm too young for that, sir. I was born in the 1970s.
Oh, no. That shows my age, And it was, the Remington razors, and he comes on and said, I love the company so much I bought it. So I just felt a little bit sort of, not guilty, but, a bit strange saying this. Because in the end...
we were all so enamored with it and had a million questions about it.
Good. And the thing is, it's not just me, of course, and I have to stress this. My business partner, Marcelo, is also a very good friend of many years.
Shout out to Marcelo.
Shout out to Marcelo. He's the guy who really sort of got me into this. And it was a question, really, Nikki, of right place at the right time. Both Marcelo and I have always been interested in wine, since we've known each other at least. And I was coming to the end of a contract that I had. I used to work for Condé Nast, the magazine publisher. I was with Condé Nast International in London, but at the time I was in Brazil. And, I'd basically done everything that I was supposed to do when I went out there. So I'd been there for 4 years, and we, set up a new joint venture and transferred some magazines, launched 2 more magazines. And really that was, I'm not going to say there was nothing left to be done, but it was up and running. And so what was the next step? And then this came up, and it was just one of those things that you sort of think, I just turned 50 at the time. I thought, well, I've still got enough energy in me for another project, Let's take a look at it. And so the it was Covela. And this is, one of the most beautiful vineyards in Portugal. It's on the banks of the Douro River, so in the north of Portugal. I mean, for those people who don't know Portugal, the 2 main cities, Lisbon is the capital in the south, and then Porto is the industrial and economic capital in the north. If you go up the river from Porto, you have 2 of the main wine producing regions in Portugal. The first region you hit is Vinho Verde, which a lot of people will know from summer
seeing on a
sipping
wine bottle.
and, maybe from traveling. And then following the Vineyard, you come to the official border with the DOC Douro, and then that becomes more of a sort of red wine port country as you head upriver. And then, of course, on the Spanish side, it continues with Ribera del Duero, etc. So it's part of an Iberian system, but because there are two countries, this is the Portuguese side. So Covela is still in the Vineyard region, so DOC Vineyard. And a lot of people think that Vineyard is a style of wine because the Vineyard that they will have drunk, especially in the States, will probably be, cheap and cheerful, little fizzy.
Wait. I don't want to brush over that. Can you say that again?
Cheap and cheerful?
Term. Cheap and cheerful.
Cheap and cheerful.
I've been called that a time or two in my life, but okay.
I think you called me that once as well, no?
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, cheap and cheerful, slightly frizzante, and sometimes slightly sweet. And, it's considered to be, your typical terrace wine for summer.
Porch pounder.
Porch pounder.
Terrace is much fancier and European. Here we call it a porch pounder.
I mean, that's what a lot of people think Vineyard is. Sure. And there's also some confusion about this because people think Vineyard can be from anywhere as long as it has these characteristics, which is not the case. So, we always hear a lot in our business about terroir, right? Everybody talks about the terroir. And, I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know what terroir is. But just for those people who don't, I mean, it's really everything that goes into the wine. It's the location, it's the climate, it's the soil, it's how we grow.
I call it the taste of the place.
Taste of the place. That's exactly what it is. And so it also involves the human input, which a lot of people forget, because it's not something that is just given to you by nature. It's what you make of that. And that is also part of your terroir. And that for us is very important at Covela because we're very particular about how we work. Southeasternmost corner of the Vineyard region, right on top of the Douro River. What makes that very special? The borderline between Vineyard and DOC Douro is a borderline of two principal things. First of all, the soil. On the Vineyard side, it's granitic, which makes for pretty mineral-driven wines. And I'm sure we'll be...
Granitic meaning high granite.
It is basically granite soil. Yeah, it's basically
you're growing in granite.
Covela, it's sandy granite. So if you pick up a lump of soil from Covela and bash it with the hammer, it crumbles. But when it crumbles, you'll see a lot of shiny bits in it, which is the granitic part. So you've got to think of that being in the ground. And that really lends itself to producing, really sort of sharpish, acute, stony, flinty type wines, okay? When you go across the border into DOC Douro, it becomes schist, so slate, so totally different type of soil. The second difference is that from Covela downriver towards Porto, you're obviously closer to the sea, so there's much more maritime influence in terms of the weather. So it's a little milder, the winters don't get so cold, the summers get hot, but not so hot. Further upriver towards the Spanish border, the temperatures are extremely hot in summer and extremely cold in winter. So where we are, we're sort of on the borderline. And that makes Covela a little different in terms of Vineyard because we do have this big difference in not just diurnal shift, but sort of seasonal shift. So the difference between the summer and the winter temperatures is much higher at Covela than it is closer to the coast.
For the listeners too, diurnal shift is that shift from height of the daytime temperature to the drop of the low at night, which I've talked about in episodes that, Napa Valley and Sonoma, we have a very big swing from high to low, which is most of your celebrated wine regions across the world have that. That importance of high during the day and low at night is just a very specific thing when it comes to farming and vineyards.
Right. So yes, Covela is there. And so the other really interesting thing about Covela and where it is, the grapes that we grow. And, if I would talk you through the whole history of Covela, it would take a long time.
It dates back to when?
So we have an old manor house on the property, which is in ruins. And we've kept it in ruins. It's preserved. And that the first mention of that we found in records is like 1588 or
I thought it
1589.
was 15 or
Yeah,
1600.
it's very old.
Wow.
So there has been a farm there for a long, long time. And in terms of, grape growing, it's been cultivated as a vineyard commercially since the 1980s. And before that, there were vines there, but it was for like own production. There was no brand. And we took over the place in 2011 and continued the work of farming. But, it was sort of like, what have we bitten off here, And it's still valid today. An awful lot of work, an awful lot of investment, and an awful lot of TLC,
Yeah.
I mean, you work in this business, work among the pines, you know how much care has to go into them to produce the good stuff that we want to produce, right?
Yeah.
And so it took quite a while for us to bring it back to its former glory, but we've done so. And I would say that by now we've probably replanted around 85% of the property. It's also, as is typical for the Douro, and this is where it becomes a real sort of Douro-looking farm, almost everything is built on terraces. So you have these stone walls, which in the case of Covela are all granite. So really big, thick, heavy, gray, sort of glistening gray, silver granite. And, it's pretty impressive when you see it because you think, how did they build this stuff, Yeah. But yeah, so all of this makes for, the terraces, the greenery, the mix of crops, and the beautiful buildings, which are also granite, historical buildings, make Covela a very, very picturesque place. And it really is very charming to drive in from the entrance. It's a real sort of sweeping granite cobbled road, and you're driving under basically a whole canopy of wisteria. And it's a unique experience. It really is.
I'm getting a little bit emotional while you describe this. And you know me well enough, and my listeners know me well enough that I'm very memory-driven, nostalgic, and I say that joy falls out of my eyes sometimes in the form of tears. And as you're describing this, we were lucky enough to visit in 2016, spend time with you at Covela. You picked us up at the airport. You drove us in that winding, sweeping road under the wisteria. Oh, I just got goosebumps. Yeah. And it was Michael and I and my parents, much like our recent trip that we did to Europe, the four of us. And we spent a few days with you experiencing all this beauty that you are talking about, and the restoration and the vines and the soil and the boat ride up the Douro that you set up for us, which was amazing.
Yeah, the Douro is really extremely special. It's a scenic blockbuster, the Douro. It's just incredible.
It's very steep around you, and then
so dramatic.
And all the properties that you're seeing, you're like, oh my gosh, that's like Graham's Port.
Right.
I know
amongst many, yeah.
Yeah, that was just the one I remember seeing because it was one I was familiar with when I was there.
And the terracing gets so steep, and it comes all the way down to the river. And
I don't think it looks like anywhere else that I have seen with the terracing specifically.
It is unique. It is unique, and that's not for nothing. It is at a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's protected, and quite rightly too. So I think probably the other strong first impression you get when you drive into Covela is that you can see immediately that we are an organically farmed property. And it's very important for the whole concept and the whole history of the property as a vineyard. So when we took over the place, it was actually certified, but it was practicing biodynamics. And so this was during the early 2000s. So it was pretty avant-garde for its time. And then, of course, the crisis came, and then so everything had to be started again. And we decided, did we want to do biodynamics or not? And we decided against it. We decided for organic. So we are fully organic. And
for our listeners, how would you describe
the basis for both of them, of course, is that you don't use anything toxic. So you don't spray with chemicals that are harmful. You try and use as natural a product as you can when you're trying to foment the growth of your grapes, right? The difference is that organic is a little less esoteric than biodynamic. I mean, biodynamic is, follows more the lunar calendar. So there are certain times in the month when you shouldn't be moving large quantities of liquid around. You look at the tides. I mean, we do understand that large quantities of water do move with gravity and with the circling the orbit of our planet around the sun. So, there is a foundation for this thinking. But for me, and for Marcelo also, I mean, we just found it a little too esoteric.
Do you fill the cowhorn and bury it with
no, we don't.
So concoction inside?
That was the one thing that sort of really got me about this. And it's not because I don't respect people who bury cowhorns. I do. However, if you're going to do that in Portugal, if you're going to be the real McCoy, your cowhorns should come from biodynamic cows, a biodynamic herd. We don't have a biodynamic herd in Portugal. So where'd you get your cowhorns from?
Amazon.
You ship them in. So, they come from Switzerland, they come from France, they come from Germany, Austria, wherever. But you're shipping them in. So what happens to your footprint? To me, it made more sense to be organic, clean, and modern. Just because you're organic doesn't mean to say you're old-fashioned. And so it's not that we're against, sort of things that are different, but we do believe in being empirical. And, Marcelo is a businessman with a lot of experience. I'm a former journalist, so we always had to go after the proof. So that's why we opted for organic. But we're very proud of our organic certification because it's
no small feat to achieve.
It's very difficult to get. I mean, it just makes for an awful lot of work. When you come into Covela, you can immediately see that this is an organically farmed property. Because between the rows of vines, if you go to a lot of wineries, you'll see that it is so manicured, as you said, but sort of there's nothing growing between the rows. And we actually plant stuff between the rows. So we do cover crops, and they're normally like leguminous. So we use mustard, lupin seeds, clover. It's stuff that grows outwards pretty quickly, so occupies the ground before any sort of unwanted weeds can get in there, and as such protects the vines. And that's immediately visible once you pass through the gate, because in springtime, it's a riot of color. So it's also very beautiful.
Great way to say it. Yeah.
It really is.
Strategic cover crops also encouraging the good insects that you want?
They encourage good insects. We have to try and keep the insects in balance. So there are some insects we don't want. But if we have other types of insects that eat those insects, we have.
Can I sing the song? Are you ready? It's the circle of life. With your Mufasa voice. Don't think, listeners, that we don't know that Tony sounds a little bit like James Earl Jones. We're very aware of this since the day I met him, just with a softer British accent. The tone of your voice.
Okay. Anyway, so this is one thing that you can see immediately when you drive into Covela or you walk into Covela. Definitely. And that's something that we're very, very proud of. It's something that our winemaker, Rui Cunha, who is a very key member of staff, but Rui is a very special guy. Covela was actually his first ever job when he graduated, and he did his internship at Covela. So it's a very special place for him. So when we took over the property, he was one of the first people I called and said, Rui, I'd like to introduce myself and just to let you know that we're taking over Covela and we'd love to have you back. And he was very excited about this and said, yes, of course, I'll be there tomorrow. And today is basically our director. He runs the place, and it's great because it's somebody who, in a way, has, as much DNA in common with the place or even more DNA in common with the place than we do. So it's great. We know that it is in very good hands. So reassembling the original team was very important. So we have people who have been working there for decades. And it's really important, as you know, in a vineyard, you've got to know where the best vines produce the best grapes to make the best wine, right? And that only comes with experience. You can't just predict it. It
Mm-mm.
comes from observation and from tasting every year, every vintage. So in addition to Rui, we were very lucky to be able to get back the former estate manager, Signor Antonio, who, when I first asked him, how long have you been working here, Signor Antonio? He said, me? Only 40 years. Anyway, Signor Antonio is now retired. And we were again lucky to find a new local lad, who was Miguel, who is really following very well in Signor Antonio's footsteps, with the guidance of another Miguel, who is our viticulture.
You have dos
We
Miguels
have
in your vineyard.
dois Miguels, and we call them M&Ms.
M&Ms.
And they make a very good team. So the vineyard at the moment it's such a pleasure to see it. It's polished, not in a polished way. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, because it is natural. It's a very natural vineyard, but you can see the care that goes into it. And that is really, really important. And, again, this brings us on to the question of the grapes. Our main grape at Covela, and one we will be trying in 3 different forms in a little while, is called Avesso. And very few people in the States will have heard of it. Not many people in Portugal know it, actually. It is rare.
And Americans don't know it, which is why I'm so excited for our listeners to get schooled on it with you right now.
Okay, well, we should start with the name.
Okay.
Avesso, the one great thing about it is, contrary to most Portuguese native grapes, you can pronounce it.
Yes, it is easy to say. It's pretty phonetic.
Avesso. Fantastic. How easy is that, right? But in Portuguese, avesso means the wrong way round. It means upside down. It means inside out. It means back to front. It means a nice one, if you're in love, head over heels.
Ah.
We also can describe somebody who doesn't want to do something. So if you're sort of avesso to doing something, you're averse to doing it.
Aversive, like the root of the word,
right.
averse. Okay,
averse. So it's that sort of idea. And it's called that because that's what it is. It's a bit of a prima donna. It's Rui, actually, our winemaker, calls it the offended lady. Because
that's Pinot Noir. We call Pinot Noir the offended lady.
So this is our offended lady, because if it's too hot, she faints. If it's too wet, she doesn't want to go out and get a new hat wet, right? I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit sexist here, right?
No, it's okay. I'm laughing and I love it.
Okay, this is a very, very pernickety grape. So it doesn't like too much heat. It doesn't like too much damp. It doesn't like too much drought. It's sort of like Goldilocks,
She likes it just right.
Just right. And so we're very lucky at Covela that we have the just right conditions generally for this grape. And we are really at the epicenter of the Avesso production, planted in a very, very small area. Yet it is considered to be one of the 4 top quality grapes in the Vinho Verde region. And it's really good with fatty foods. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine it's like a roast pork leg or something like that, or duck, something that's got quite heavy, right? Because it's high in acidity. So it really cuts through all the fattiness.
The richness. Okay? Yeah, we love that.
So the main gourmet dish at Covela and surrounding area is roast lamb.
Yes, we did do this when we were there under the pergola.
Yes.
By candlelight. Yes.
And it's roast lamb done in the wood-burning oven, like a pizza oven. And it's done it very slowly and very long. And it comes out of there basically dropping off the bone. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine it's not the lightest of food, but it is so delicious. And people will say to me, especially my fellow Brits, who say, "You're drinking white with lamb? Are you crazy? Mm-hmm. Should be red." I said, "No, with this lamb, really, this is not pink inside lamb. This is like, heavy duty 6 hours in the oven lamb, and it just falls apart. It's delicious, but it's heavy." And so the Avesso pairs perfectly with this lamb because it's high in acidity, it's strong in minerality, it really just cuts through the grease like a knife. It's not a very nice way of saying it, is it?
No, that's what it does. That's
But
what
it
acidity
does.
does.
But it
Can we
does.
taste it?
I think we
I
can.
poured it in my glass as you were
Okay.
talking because I was like, I can't wait. I need to sip spotlight. You were kind enough to ship to me. And guys, good news. Tony's wines can be shipped. Covela wines can be shipped to the US. But I have 3 bottles of Covela 2022, but they're 3 very different wines.
Right.
So we're going to start with the one in the real tall kind of German Riesling shaped bottle.
Yes, it's a Rhine bottle, as we call it here.
Bottle.
We call it here, which is quite interesting. We call it a pistola because it looks like a pistola, like a pistol.
Yes,
because it's long barrel. It's a Rhine bottle, which in Portugal has become synonymous with the Vinho Verde bottle. So if we taste this, first of all, on the nose, normally the Avesso is not so, it can be fruity, but in our interpretation of it, it is not so fruity.
No.
We vinify this to the end. We want this to be a totally dry, white, gastronomic wine. We believe that it's mineral driven. And so the fruit is there, but it sort of plays second fiddle to the minerality.
But to me, the fruit, especially on the nose, like there's some citrus notes, but it's not like lemon juice or lime juice. It's the zest.
So the
and
zest.
A little bit of that pith that gives you that kind of bitter citrus on the nose in a beautiful way, not juicy citrus.
And then you can probably pick up maybe some like white stone fruit.
Yeah. Again, listener, stone fruit, any fruit with a pit, right? Peach, apricot, things with a pit. Oh my gosh, Tony, I haven't had this since we visited you, and it's stunning.
But like I said, crisp, mineral-driven, dry, and the great thing, has a really long finish.
It really does.
Which makes for an excellent gastronomic wine.
It really does. It almost is a mouth coating and a long finish, more that you would expect from a light red wine.
Yes, exactly. So this makes it for a really, really good food wine. And I don't know, what do you think, Nikki, around the Napa Valley? What would you eat with this?
We're in the same category like a Viognier, like Pride's Viognier, because it's a bolder white flavor and texture. I think any cheese, I'm looking at your notes from your website right here on this wine, and you're talking about goat cheese or pecorino. Yeah. So if you're not a carnivore and you're not thinking about the lamb falling off the bone, that's okay. You can go to the Lamb's Friend, the goat, and get some cheese. And that could be really pretty, because I think the acidity of the goat cheese and the acidity of this wine would be a match made in heaven. I have a question for you. When I was prepping and opening these beautiful wines today and pulling out my glassware, you specifically call out in the notes here to enjoy in a burgundy shape wine glass, which listener, that is the bigger bowl that you'll see, which typically Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are served in that. Why is that, Tony? Why do you think this glass? We
feel that especially the aromas, which can be muted in a smaller glass, we think it brings them out much more. And I have this wine now served in 2 types of glasses. So I have a more angular Bordeaux glass in front of me, and I just served some now in a Burgundy glass. So I'm just going to try both.
Yeah, let's see if it's different. By the way, because of our 8-hour time difference, it is 10:40 a.m. here in California, and I am...
And she's already hitting the booze.
I do have a spit cup here because I was like, we're tasting 3 wines, and I still have a full day ahead of me after this call. But Tony, it's like almost 6 o'clock in the evening there. You're ramping up for dinner in the evening.
We are indeed.
So
almost 7 o'clock. Almost 7 o'clock. No spitting. Spitters are quitters.
There it is. There it is. So I got to give some context. The spitters are quitters. So when you're in wine school, as Tony and I were sitting next to each other in the classroom, tasting 30, 40 wines a day, you sign a waiver that you are not going to swallow the wines or you'll be schnockered at the end of class. You sign a waiver that you will be using your little spittoon. But some of the wines that we would taste in that class, we'd look at each other and just be like, I cannot.
No.
expectorate this wine. I need to swallow this wine. So then we started saying spitters are quitters. It's purely wine related, people.
Yes, absolutely. Don't go there.
No.
But anyway, so I'm trying this wine in different types of glass. And I do think that in a Burgundy glass, in the rounder, more globular glass,
Which
I
is what
think
I
that
have.
I really think that the nose comes off much more distinctively.
But when I smelled it again, you said it's very mineral driven.
Yeah.
And so I want to go back to what you were talking about, these granite based soils
Mhm.
and the shiny bits in them. Do
Right.
you believe you can taste the granite in the wine?
It's something that I personally do believe in. I know this is one of those things that a lot of people say, what are you talking
It's
about?
always a hot
You know?
debate, minerality in wine. It's a
What are you
buzzword.
talking about? I do believe that. I mean, it's like you said, this is really a hot issue, right? And everybody argues about this. And I still believe there is a link. It may be in my head, who knows? But I think there's something flinty about this wine. Flinty like scraping two rocks together.
Or the little, like
to
in
fire.
chemistry class, that little fire starter that
Yeah.
was a flint, right?
Yeah,
It-
that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I do get that.
But
and I
again,
do think
this is,
wine is very
how does
mineral.
it get there? Is this a characteristic of the grape itself? Does it depend on where it's planted? Does it depend on how it's farmed?
All three of these wines, this is the first one that we're tasting,
Right.
are all Avesso. If we had a map of your vineyard, are these three wines from three very different parts or rows or sections or blocks?
They are actually. The first one is the more general. I mean, we don't sort of look for any specific plot or parcel for this wine because this is the wine that we make most of. So we need to produce a lot of this.
And what's the price on this?
So here in Portugal, you would pay €9 for this.
So ridiculous to me.
Yes.
It's just crazy in a
Yes.
good way. An American having this shipped in, not talking about shipping charges, but just wine bottle
So
price.
so the bottle price for us is the same. So $10.
It's
Plus
ridiculous.
you have the shipping. And a lot of people balk at the shipping because it's so expensive. If you really add it all together, what would you pay for a wine of this quality in the States? $25?
For the bottle, 40.
No, maybe not.
California?
Yeah.
In California, Tony, for a white wine of this quality? Yeah.
So I've got to move to California. I think the last time I looked, it was like $180 for
Which
a case.
is really not, I mean, that's
For
shipping
12.
a case of wine
Yeah.
from East Coast to West Coast in the US is about $150.
Okay, so
So
it's,
$180 overseas is impressive.
I mean, it's doable. And
Yeah.
considering the price of the wine here, this is still a good buy for whoever's in the States,
Well, and I really, really believe that it is nearly impossible to go into any local wine shop across the US and say, hey, I'm looking for a Vesso. I
Oh.
think most of the wine shop employees, even
say,
the certified
"What?"
ones, might look at you and
Yeah.
say, this is so, so rare. So this
Right.
is such a treat. So
Okay,
now we're
so
going to
we'll
go
move
this
on to
next
number
level.
2, yeah?
Yeah.
So this is then our refined version of the first one. So this
Should I
again,
pour it differently,
yes,
like with my
no.
pinky up
No,
as I
but this
do it?
no, but this definitely does benefit from the Burgundy glass, and you will see why. I should have mentioned the first one is 100% made in stainless steel, and no malolactic. Everything's sharp as a razor. And the second one also no mallow, but we do about 4 or 5 months in used barrels. So just a slight hint of wood in there, but it's slight.
It
I mean,
softens the sharpness of the minerality on the nose. It's still there. It hasn't gone away. But to me, it's
It rounds it
supplemented with
out.
just a little bit of that rounder, kind of very subtle baking spice.
Yeah, that I would say, without wishing to sort of blow my own trumpet here, but that is sort of a Burgundy style because it's old barrels. It's not new oak. It's
Like
just
how
a
they make
hint.
Chardonnay and Burgundy.
Yeah, it's just a hint of
Ooh.
barrel. And so this doesn't change the character of the Avesso, but it does beef it up a little bit.
Yes.
So you can imagine doing this like maybe with smoked fish. Or
Your website suggested pairing says ratatouille. also a Disney
Ratatouille.
reference that I
Oh
love.
my word, we did this especially for you.
Ratatouille.
You do realize that?
Question before
Yeah,
we go to the third
sure.
one. When I look at these labels side by side, not only are the bottles different shapes, but on the reserve, you have the organic and
Yes.
biologico
Yes.
notifications on there,
Right.
which is not on the first Aviso.
That's correct. So the reason for that is that, as I mentioned, we replanted so much of the property that we can produce enough organic grapes for our needs. So for the more basic Aveso, we still have been buying in. And of course, then you really don't control whether the
You're
grapes
supplementing
are
your
organic or
estate
not.
Aviso, yeah, and
So we
which
have
is why you okay,
so we have estate grapes in there, but it's not exclusively estate grapes.
that makes sense,
However,
totally.
however, as of 2023, this is also organic.
So 22 that we're tasting was the last year where this in fact
Yes.
was the case. Now you're
Yeah.
full organic on all of
And
your
that's
fruit.
happened also with our rosé, because we make a
Congrats.
rosé from Touriga Nacional, and that
Mhm.
also has been switched to certified organic.
I have to say, tasting is one right after the other, especially to most wine drinkers. They are not vastly
No,
different. They're
no,
really not. They
no.
taste of the same grape from the same place. But if we get really nitty gritty and think about, especially knowing what you've told me about stainless versus barrel, there's just a little bit more of a richness
Mhm.
and a different nose on the reserve. That's really lovely.
The other thing that I think that we believe will, the wine will benefit from having been finished in barrel is, in terms of ageability.
Yeah.
So we
Yep.
do think that this will age really well, especially considering the regular Aveso also ages really well. And so that's the Aveso made in stainless. So
Okay.
we do believe that the Aveso with a touch of wood will be even more, how should I say, developable, over time.
Because that oak gives some structure, some
Yeah,
picture frame, which
yeah,
will help it to age in the bottle,
exactly.
yeah. Price
Yeah.
difference between these 2?
This is here is about 16 euros. Still
Amazing.
very
Yeah.
reasonable for the quality of the wine, and it's
I
organically certified.
I finished what I had poured, and just between you and me, my spit cup is empty.
No,
And so I just poured the third
okay.
one, which
So now
I'm
we're going to the
really
third one.
intrigued about in my glass. Tell me what the heck is happening here.
So this is an Aveso Reserva again, but it's Aveso Reserva Natur. So it's our wine that is as closest to nature as we can get. So the thing is, there's this whole debate about natural wines, and very often, to be really, really honest, I taste natural wines and I think, that's a dud, you
Yeah.
know? There's
They're
a
a little
defect in
funky.
there.
They're a little
Yeah,
weird.
there's a defect in there. They didn't get something right in the winemaking. And of course, the comeback is always, no, 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 no. What you're drinking is sort of overproduced and blah, blah, blah. To me, Nikki, and I believe also to you, wine drinking to me has always been about pleasure.
Mhm.
I mean, we like it to be pleasurable. So I want something that I really enjoy drinking.
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't like funky stuff. I'm
Nope.
sorry. I can
I mean,
appreciate
I like
it.
blue cheese. That's funky, but
I can appreciate it, but it's really not what I want. However, we do understand that, there is this movement, and it in a way belongs to us also, in terms of the more natural, the better, the closer to nature you can get, the better it is. It fits with our whole organic philosophy. We decided to make this wine, and this wine is very special. And I will just give you a very quick rundown of how I discovered this. So I was at this local wine fair in the north of Portugal a few years ago, and on the next table to me was this older gentleman, Fernando, who I've known for years, who makes really, really, really interesting wines. And he is a biodynamic guy. He does the full works. I don't think he plays Mozart to his vines, but apart from that, he basically does everything. And the wines are really good, I'd say. Excellent, excellent wines. He called me over and he said, you've got to come and taste this. Come and taste this. It's something I've been doing. So I went over to his table and we tasted this wine. And it was really unlike anything I'd ever tasted before. If I had to put a badge on it, I would say that it was like tasting new wine fresh out of the cellar, before it's really been finished,
Yeah.
And so I said, well, this is really interesting, but what is it? He said, well, I've been using this technique whereby I don't use any sulfites. And immediately my ears went pricked up. I said, oh, that's really interesting. Because, a lot of people here in Europe complain about sulfites. I don't know if that's the case in the States. I would think probably less so.
People will bring it up, but people are confused and do not have good information about what sulfur in wine, sulfur dioxide, sulfites, whatever it is. There's a lot of misconceptions, but it is a little bit of a hot topic as well.
I mean, basically, we should get this clear from the start. We use SO2 to stabilize the wine. If you're shipping a load of wine to Brazil from here, you're going to the tropics. It gets unloaded in Brazil at really high temperatures. The chance is that if you don't stabilize the wine, it's going to turn into vinegar. That's the natural course of things. You don't want that. So there is a necessity to stabilize the wine. Mostly it is done with sulfite. But here, this whole debate about SO2, it really sort of caught my imagination because what he used to stabilize the wine is chestnut blossom.
Chestnut blossoms.
Blossom, flowers, dried chestnut flowers, which are then ground up. And then when it comes around to the stabilization of the wine, instead of putting the SO2 in, you put the ground up flowers in there.
It's like a powder, a fine powder.
It looks like a flour. Yeah, it looks like a FLOUR.
Like flour.
Yeah. And so you put that in instead of the sulfites. And what I did not know is that chestnuts have been used for years in the cosmetics industry because it's very high in antioxidants.
Preventing against oxidation and the negative effects of oxidation.
And I didn't know this. And so I came back to Covela and I told Rui about this, who immediately got even bigger ears than I had. I said,
excited.
Oh, that's really interesting. We should really try that. In addition, Covela, one of the trees that we have a lot of are chestnuts. So we decided, okay, we're going to harvest our own chestnut flowers. We're going to dry them. We're going to grind them up, and we're going to test this. So this was, I think it was 2018. We did this. So we made just one barrel and bottled it and waited. So the winemaking was probably finished in October. And then we came back to it in May, and Rui and I opened the bottle, and it tasted like this, which is sort of like this fresh, young wine.
Yes.
There is depth to it, but it's not particularly layered, I would say. But it is very well balanced.
In a blind tasting of these three side by side, I would guess that this one, the Natur, was younger. I would say this was a 2023 against its counterpart 2022s, but that's not the case. They're all the same. But I agree, it gives a freshness. The nose is totally different for me. Do you feel like, or have you guys been, now I have a million questions because this, to my knowledge, is the first time I'm ever tasting a wine that has been stabilized with dried chestnut blossom. This is so cool.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, kind of the same question, can you taste the granite from the soil in the wine? Can you taste the chestnut blossom in the wine? Do you feel like it adds a character?
I do think you can, actually. And it's really at the sort of the end of the finish. There is sort of a nuttiness there. I'm not going to say chestnut, but nuttiness.
I would say that, which is like what we get on aged white wine, like an old Chardonnay might have a little nuttiness, like hazelnut, which is so interesting because we're saying the beginning part of when you taste this wine seems younger, but the finish.
It's basically the other way around,
Was this an oak?
This was just like the Adesso Reserva. It was about 3 or 4 months in oak. And it's the oldest barrels we can find.
Super neutral. Oh my God. It's so interesting. The finish is very long and very different. And I knew you were doing some really unique and interesting things there. I didn't know the details of this until I sat down and prepped for our session today. This is so cool. Congratulations. I mean, on all of it, but especially this really unique take. And even just the packaging. So the bottle's the same, but now your label is more natural colors, kind of muted. It's got that little bit of wax on the top, just like our
Yeah.
Solovato, which I love. But it's
I
so
mean,
unique.
if you notice, we went, the natur, the word natur is actually larger than Covela because we really wanted to attract this market.
It is so interesting. And all three of these are available to be shipped in the US.
Yes, absolutely.
Tony, I have, before we say goodbye,
Yes.
I have a listener question for you.
Oh.
Listener questions.
Her name is Wendy. You might know her.
I may know her.
Now that it's been over 12 years since buying the winery, what would you go back and tell your pre-2012 self?
Ooh, be prepared for every eventuality because you never know what's going to hit you next.
Perfect. This one is from a man named Zane. Interesting name. I don't know. Maybe you've heard of him. What's next? Plans for making any wine down south?
Oh, so many people have asked me this because, I've sort of moved my residence to southern Portugal, and the Algarve is like our main touristic area. And it's always been a wine producing region, but the wine sort of fell out of favor for many years. However, we've had a massive tourist boom. And what do tourists want? They want to taste the local wine.
Yeah.
And so there's been
all over Europe this summer.
There has been a renaissance of Algarve winemaking. Whether I will go into that or not, I mean, I think this is one of those age-related things. When I think about it, I mentioned when we first met, I just turned 50, and now I'm 62. I'm not old. I don't feel old, but there is a long timeline with wine investment, right? I'm very happy that the project that we have is going well, and the investment levels are sort of leveling off a little bit. And so would I like to do something down? I would love to do something down here. I would be very interested, but I have no plans for that, no.
We're going to leave that as a ... Listeners, if you are planning a trip overseas, and I know so many of us have been traveling to Europe, go to Portugal. Check out the website. Not only can you visit and wine taste and see this beautiful property, but there are residences where you can stay, that you can rent and stay on the property overlooking the Douro, and it is amazing. So I will put the link in the show notes. Tony, I can't believe we finally did this.
I can't believe we finally did this.
Your wines are phenomenal. My head is still trying to wrap around everything that we just tasted. Now I have 3 open bottles with 2 tastes out of them. Thank goodness I have a Coravin to preserve them. And Michael can enjoy the fruits of our work this morning.
I really appreciate you inviting me. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And
keep doing what you're doing.
I really hope that, people who are listening will be interested in our Avesso and other things that we make. But, the Avesso is really important. It's really close to my heart,
Yeah, I can tell the way you speak about it. And it's just something that you really cannot get here. So I hope that they'll hop on your website and even do what we did, get a couple of each of the 3 and do a side-by-side tasting with the notes. That would be cool. Tony, cheers.
Anyway, thank you so much. Salud.
We'll do it.
Salud.
Oh, by the way, before we say goodbye, tell our listeners, how many languages do you speak?
Gosh, my latest thing, I'm learning Italian.
Because you don't know enough languages?
So English, Portuguese, French, German, Spanish. And then I used to speak, because of my professional background, Serbo-Croat, bit of Russian.
I think we just crossed 7. You're my hero.
Va bene.
Grazie mille. Thank you so much, Tony. I love you so much, and thank you for your time today. Wow. I wish that you could taste these wines, and the good news is you can. So check the link in the show notes to be able to purchase them. I want to give a huge thank you for Tony. I know he's super busy, and we spent a good amount of time together. You only heard a portion of our conversation, and I'm just really excited to see the success that he has had. It has been a work in progress literally for 12 years. So congratulations, Tony and Marcelo and Rui and the Miguels, the M&Ms, the whole team there at the beautiful Covela property. Don't forget, if you would like to be an angel and support the podcast, buy me a glass of wine, say thank you for the free education and entertainment. I use that term loosely. There's also a link in the show notes to support the podcast. So we thank you for that. And as always, sip well.